Hey there again, it's Nelfie coming to you with a 7.1 Arcane Mage guide. We got a lot to cover in this video, so I'm just going to jump right into it. The first thing I wanted to talk about as far as Arcane Mages go is stats. Stats are something that everyone seems to be completely confused about because it seems like we should stack mastery, especially with Quickening. We really don't want any haste, and so there's a lot of confusion over this. And I wanted to start by saying there's two ways to build an Arcane Mage at this point that seem to both be viable. And by viable, I mean a good way to get good outcome. The way that I choose is by running a higher crit build with a little bit of versatility and haste, and I don't worry about mastery much. I've gone as low as 27% and as high as 35%, depending on my gear as it changes. And with this, I don't run a Quickening stack up to 50 barrageless rotation. I just run a typical rotation, which I'll explain later. And the other way to gear your Arcane Mage is just to stack mastery just as much as you can. You usually end up with like 6% haste, and any crit or versatility you grab along the way is bonus, but you're basically wanting to stack mastery. I think some people go up to around about 55%, and that build is typically for a barrageless rotation, and you stack Quickening up to 50 and burst, and so that's one way you can, those are the two main ways that you can build Arcane Mages as far as stats go. Some people ask why I have so much haste, and I think haste does really bad in sims when you sim it, but it doesn't account for cast times, movement, and if you have to barrage, then you have to start back at 0 stacks and get those back with 0 Quickening stacks, and so that kind of helps that part of the rotation. The next thing I wanted to go over was gear. As far as gear goes, you're more than likely going to want item level upgrades, because our stats, if you're going with the current build I'm going with stat-wise, you can switch out pieces in and out and it'll kind of move your stats around, but that's not a really big deal. You're mostly going for item level upgrades. As far as some best in slot pieces, some of the pieces we're going to want the 2 set from Arcway and Court of Stars, and I don't know at what level these become a downgrade or an upgrade in comparison to if you had 2 880 pieces and 2 850 pieces. I think you'd go with the 880. I have an 880 set piece and an 855 one, and so I've kind of settled with that. As far as rings, the Nod Thumb ring is going to be great because it lines up perfectly with our cooldown, every other at least, and it's a damage done increase during our cooldowns, which is great. Outside of that, the big things will be Trinkets, which we'll talk about in a second, but there is a neck from Arcway that gives you a 5% mana increase, which definitely isn't worth taking over like an 880 with your best stats on it. That's also socketed, but it is a good boost as well. Outside of that, there's no particular pieces that are so much better than anything else. And the next thing I wanted to go into was Trinkets. This is another part that's typically a huge question for everybody. And I wanted to come over here, and this is Binkenstein's latest Arcane Trinket list, so props to him for doing all the work. I'm just going to go over it with you. The Arcane Trinkets that are at the top, you might not be able to read that. I'll link it put a link in the bottom in the description. But the top 2 are Aran's Relaxing Ruby, and if you have the chest, it is by far the best thing. Then from there it goes down. Neuraxis' Spiked Tongue. If you have it over 860, then it's the next best. The Unstable Arcano Crystal that drops from Withered Gem is going to probably be your best trinket that you can get, especially if it Titan Forges or gets a socket, as well as the Aran's Relaxing Ruby. Outside of that, some other great choices are the Spiked Tongue, the Gnarled Root, Bow of Corruption, and Swarming Plague Hive aren't bad. Swarming Plague Hive's kind of easier to get at 880 since it's the first mythic boss if you're looking for that. And that's currently what I run with my Arcano Crystal. I haven't gotten a Rand's Relaxing Ruby to drop yet. But that's the trinket list, and I'll link that in the guide. So I wanted to go over that and make sure you guys get that, because that's a big contention point for a lot of people. As far as relics go, some of the best relic is going to be Arcane Missile percent to proc chance, which I have, let's see, right here. And that drops from Heroic Xavius or Xavius in general. And farming for just those is going to be a long grind, depending on how lucky you are to get good ones. Other decent ones are increases critical strike chance by 1% and increases damage of Arcane Blast by 2% as well. There's Arcane Missile damage, and Arcane Power extends, one of the relics extends the duration, that's the word I was looking for, of Arcane Power by 1 second. And it's yet to be seen whether that will be better than the Arcane Missile percent proc from in the upcoming 7.15. So I would hold on to both of those and work for both of those. That's as far as relics goes. Artifact path, I'll put this picture in the description as well. What you want to do is you want to go left up this way, and then come down, get Rule of Threes first, and then come up and get Arcane Rebound second. And then where you go from there depends on whether you want single target or AoE. If you want AoE, you can go this way and get the Arcane Barrage damage, then everywhere at once and touch the Magi. Or you can as well pick this up with that beforehand. Or you can go straight over to Arcane Missiles, increase damage, then this in here. So there's two ways to get there, and I'll link the path, and then you get these ones last. A lot of people think that Evocation Explosion is really worth it. You can get that if you want to. It's really only amazing in huge scale AoE situations, and even then you have to time it pretty well to have it really effective. Next up is going over our talents. As far as talents go, it's pretty one-sided in most of them as far as rating. Arcane Familiar is what you want to go over Presence of Mind and Words of Power. Words of Power can be good if you run the wrists, and then it has an added benefit, but even still it doesn't come close to Arcane Familiar, which has the passive pet damage, the chance to proc Arcane Missiles, and extra mana, which also increases Mark of Volunith damage. Shimmer, for me, is a no-brainer. Some people like to run Cauterize or Cold Snap. If that's your thing, go for it. Next up is Rune of Power. This is really big because you want to line this up with Mark of Volunith as well as your Arcane Power, and that also makes the Nod Thumb Ring more important for the extra 5% damage stacked on top of all of that. You can run Incanter's Flow. It's not recommended, and Mirror Images is just not as good as it always has been, or it's always been not so good. Next up, for single target and for raid, I typically run Supernova and Nether Tempest. Charged up has viability as far as the Legendary Kilt goes, if you have that. As well, you can run Resonance if you're running Il'gynoth or a high-scale AoE encounter in the future. As well as Mythic Pluses, I'll run Resonance. But Supernova helps proc Arcane Missiles and seems to do the most single target damage. As well as Nether Tempest, which a lot of people think just seems dumb. And to be honest, it out DPS's Erosion in single target, so it also procs Arcane Missiles. And I skipped over the 75 talent because if you take Ring of Frost or Ice Ward over Ice Flows, I'm sorry, but you should always go with Ice Flows to keep on the move. As well, Quickening is just obliterates Overpowered right now, and Arcane Orb does no damage. Even in Mythic Plus, it's just pitiful damage. So Quickening is the go-to there. And these are pretty much this is pretty much what I run on every fight, with maybe the exception of Il'gynoth. If I'm looking to parse, I'll go with Resonance. and even still I would probably keep Nether Tempest. So that's for talents. Next up is rotation. Now I'm gonna stick to the barraging rotation at first, and then I'll go over the quickening stacking with the barrageless rotation after that. As far as an opener goes, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to pre-pot, and then you will precast Arcane Blast, and then Arcane Blast up to 4. I have this written down in a guide as well, which will also be in the link, that you can see this written somewhere. But you're going to precast Arcane Blast up to 4, and then, depending on how much haste you have, we'll change this next part. You'll either have to cast another Arcane Blast in between Supernova and Nether Tempest to keep your quickening stacks up, but you'll cast a 4, Supernova, Nether Tempest, and then you're going to Mark of Alunith, Rune of Power, Arcane Power, and then pop your Nod Thumb Ring or Berserking, whatever you might have, and then Arcane Blast, and I'll show you that real quick. This is how it goes. Pre-pot, Arcane Blast, and then we'll do 4 of them. Then we're going to go into Nether Tempest, Supernova, Mark of Alunith, Rune of Power, Arcane Power, Nod Thumb Ring, and then Arcane Blast into that. And you don't refresh Nether Tempest until you're outside of your burn window, because the damage it'll give you in there doesn't amount to the same as an Arcane Missiles or an Arcane Blast. So that's what our burn phase looks like. And on your opener, you're going to burn down to 0% mana, evocate, and then you'll refresh Nether Tempest, burst on Supernova, and then there's 2 ways of doing this phase. You can either pop your next Rune of Power, because if you saved us an Arcane Missile at the end of that evocate, you'll have an Arcane Missile that you can use to keep your quickening up, and some people will pop their second Rune of Power here, burn down to about something like 60%, and then you'll Arcane Barrage. And this is where the conserve rotation comes in. What you typically do in the conserve rotation is you'll build up Arcane Blasts, and then you'll refresh Nether Tempest, Supernova, and then you'll dump any Arcane Missile procs you have, and then you'll Barrage. So it's similar to the WoD rotation, the Warlords of Draenor rotation, in which you'll build up to 4, and then you'll refresh Nether Tempest, dump your Arcane Missile stacks, and this is my Ronin's, my Bracers proc, which I can use for free, and then you'll dump. And so you'll do this, and during your conserve, at some point, you're going to get a Mark of Alunith to come off cooldown, and you'll Mark of Alunith, Rune of Power, and then you'll dump your Arcane Missiles and your Supernova, and then use your Barrage or your Arcane Blasts, and then when your Rune of Power's up, you'll Barrage again near the end of it, and then once you realize Arcane Power has come off cooldown, you can pop that and then burn everything. Typically you should have a little more mana than this. And if you're running out of mana early in this phase, what you'll have to do is not burn down to 60% mana on your second Rune of Power after you evocate, if that makes sense. So that's the pretty basic conserve and burn phase. As far as that goes, there's a lot of min-maxing to do in there and ways that you can keep your quickening stacks up for your burn. And so now what I wanted to go over is the barrageless rotation. Let me drink some mana for you here and wait for Arcane Power to come off cooldown. So we'll drink a little bit of mana here, and I'll do a opener, and then I'll go into the second Arcane Power with 40 quickening stacks about, and that's what the aim of the barrageless rotation is to wait out the quickening stacks and conserve mana, and able to burn with Rune of Power, Arcane Power up when you have around 40 quickening stacks, and then you have a lot of haste so you can get a lot more casts in. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Let's see. I can probably pre-pot and start now, so I'll do that. So you Arcane Blast up to 4. Supernova, Nether Tempest. I'm gonna just pop that. One more Arcane Missiles. Mark of Valunith, Rune of Power. Oh, I already dropped my 5 stacks. Well, don't do that. The real magic in here is after you evocate, though. And another thing, you want to save an Arcane Missile when you're doing this by the end, so you'll just do your normal burn. I'll probably Rune of Power again. Put my Nether Tempest up, drop Supernova. You essentially use everything you can to get as many stacks as possible while you're burning all your mana. And I'm getting pretty lucky on Arcane Missile procs. So right after this finishes, I want to drop my Arcane Missiles so I can keep my Quickening stacks up. So now what the goal is you just wait. And then right at the end you cast Arcane Missiles, or usually about halfway you can get an Arcane Blast off. And then some people spam Arcane or Nether Tempest to try to get procs. I don't do that. But you can also Arcane Explosion and get close after your evocation to keep the stacks up. And when I get a free Ronins, I use that as well. So we now have 15 seconds left before Arcane Power is back up, and our Rune of Power is already back up. So you'll see how I don't have my stacks up as high. I would have had 5 more had I not dropped them in the opener. It would have been a little closer. I'll just show you how to do this now. So you drop Mark of Valunith, Rune of Power, Arcane Power, and then you'll just spam Arcane Blast and Arcane Missiles. Boom. And then I'm now at 43. And then I'll pop a second Rune of Power and burn that. And you can see how many more casts I get in there. And then my evocation comes off quickly, and then you essentially start the same thing over again. So that's how you'll get through on the Quickening thing. So if I'm going to have resources posted below as well, or it might just pop up here. There's somebody else that does a lot of, he's really into the Quickening thing, so I'm going to link that to you. He does a couple videos and has a Discord as well. Now we've done the Quickening and the basic burn and conserve. I'm going to move on to talking about Legendaries. As far as single target DPS goes, the best Legendaries in order are going to be here I'll pull up the Legendaries thing. How do I go to loot? The best one is going to be Ronin's Assaulting Armor Ops, and the second one is either going to be the Kilts or the Shard, depending on kill times and a couple things. So if you're running on Zavis, you'd probably want the Shard. If you're running for random raid, it'd probably be the Kilt, and the Court of Infinity probably last. As far as AoE goes, Kilt's going to be the best, then followed by the Shard, and then probably the Belt, and then the wrist, to be honest. And there's going to be a change in rotation of how you do certain things depending on which legendary you have. As far as the Ronin's Assaulting Armor Ops, you saw it while I was casting, that it'll sometimes proc. Let me hero to get this out quicker. Once I get an Arcane Missile proc, I'll get a couple so you can see. Or I won't get a couple, I'm not as lucky as last time. So when I cast this, it'll show up immediately if I get a Ronin's proc. So let's see if I can get it to proc again. Let's see some mana reducing things. Oh, come on. There we go. So I use one, no proc. There's my proc. So you can tell by the end of your cast whether you need to be casting Arcane Blast or Arcane Missiles next. So you typically don't want to spam 3 Arcane Missiles in a row. You have to wait and see if you get a proc, and then you'll Arcane Blast in between. Outside of that, it'll make your burn phase a lot longer. So you have to keep that in mind. as far as when your evocation and arcane power will be off cooldown. As far as the pants goes, there's several ways to do this. I haven't had the pants, and so I don't have the best optimized rotation, but what a lot of people will do is they will burn all the way through their mana bar once, evocate, and then burn down to about 60% or 50%, then barrage, and then you'll build up 4 charges through arcane blasts, refresh Nether Tempest, drop supernova, any arcane missiles, then barrage, and usually that brings your mana back up. And at that point, what you can do is you can burn maybe down to 60% mana, gain maybe 6 or 8 quickening stacks, then pop arcane power, then burn it all the way down, evocate, and do the same thing. So the rotation isn't too much different. It is a lot different if you run charged up, because you will have every 40 seconds you'll have a free 16% mana that you can cast, and you can barrage and then arcane or charged up, and then you can drop a arcane missile procs and then barrage again, and that right there will jump you up 32%. And if you choose to do that route, you can probably burn your entire mana bar. Then once you have around 20 stacks of quickening, you could burn arcane power right after your evocation, burn down to like 20% maybe, something around there. And then at that point you could barrage, and then you could charged up, barrage again, and you would have charged up again as well before your evocation and arcane power came off cooldown. So that's another way that you could use that. And then the next up is, let's see, the belt. What I would do is do the normal rotation, burn all your mana all the way down from 100% evocation, and then drop another rune of power and burn down to just under 40%, and then barrage. And so you want to kind of hang around 40%. You don't want to push too much, because if you get under 40%, then you might run out of mana before your arcane power comes off cooldown. And so you can drop down, let's see, about 40, and you're going to want to be saving your arcane missile proc. So then you would barrage, and then you build up, because all you have to do is dip under 40. And then you'd build up like this, drop Nether Tempest, supernova, and you could arcane missiles. And then you'll see how this starts to eat at your mana slowly. You might even want to use an arcane missiles for the last one, just to keep the mana there. And what you could do is you could wait till your arcane power is off cooldown and your evocation is off cooldown, so that way when it comes time, you can burn it like this, evocate, and then arcane power. It'll be a couple seconds off, and it won't be the difference between, typically won't be the difference between getting another arcane power off or evocation during the fight. So that's an option there. And then the next thing was the shard. The shard doesn't really change your rotation other than you just get a second hero, and that's awesome. But you do have to keep in mind, you're going to want to have, when you're prepping to do your second hero, you're not going to want to start heroism at 40% mana. You're not going to want to start here in heroism. It would be better to start here, because you'd have more mana to burn, and then just keeping that in mind, because heroism does drain your mana a lot quicker. Next up, just a couple little tricks as far as arcane goes. I was talking to someone the other day, and they did not know this, that you can, when you're running shimmer, you can, or even blink, you can shimmer up like this, and see how my shimmer charge went down by 1, it's recharging. But if you use displacement, then your shimmer charge is immediately refunded. And so you can use that for all kinds of things. So what's also good is when you're evocating, I'll show you when my cooldown comes off, that when you evocate, instead of saving, if you don't happen to get an arcane missile to proc and you're out of arcane missiles, let's see, I'm out of arcane missiles, oh no, because I just used it, and you're about to evocate, you can shimmer in since it's off the global, and then you can arcane explosion to keep your quickening going. Mine didn't work because I waited too long after I casted my arcane explosion, but you can blink in arcane explosion and then displace back out. Another trick you can do is you can icy flows while you're casting it, and then walk in to get the Evo Explosion and to use Arcane Explosion as well. So those are 2 tips, and knowing how to use displacement is really good, especially when you're running the chest. With the chest, it gives you a blink after casting Shimmer, or it gives you a shield, I'm sorry, after you cast Shimmer. And when you use displacement after that, you keep the shield. So that's useful to know. So there's that, and then let's see. Another big tip that'll help you in encounters is knowing how and when to time your mana. Especially sometimes it's just bad luck and you can't really time it because of the kill time of the boss. But sometimes you get lucky and you can maybe hold your mana. Something I might do like at the end is if I'm noticing, oh, Ursoc's down to like 10%, is I'll be up here at, let's see, at like 90%, and I notice, Ursoc's getting close near the end, so I'm going to kind of hang on, build my Quickening stacks up. Maybe I see he's at 15% and I got a full mana bar. And I go, oh, okay, once it gets down to 10, then I'll burn all my mana. And I have my cooldowns up. But what you don't want to do is burn all your mana too soon. So you go, oh, we're at 20%. I'm going to kind of save my mana. We'll use the Quickening stacks. Okay, so I'm at 15. Let's say I burn up to, I don't know, maybe 20. So then I go, okay, he's getting down to 10%. Now I'll burn. And then I go through here and spend my entire mana bar. And that way you can load all your damage and make sure you've used all of your mana by the end of the encounter. And then you evocate, and then Arcane Missile right at the end. And then I'll know, okay, he's going to die in a couple seconds. I'm going to drop my Rune of Power. And then all my Arcane Missiles, and then obliterate them into Oblivion. And parse uber high. Because that's what we like doing as mages. And then barrage right at the end. So that's something that'll really help your damage in general. If a lot of times your parses aren't looking as high, it'll usually come down to kill time, or if your mana lined up with the end of the boss fight. And that was one of the last things I wanted to go over, was a lot of times people will wonder why they're parsing low. And a couple things that I will mention as far as parsing lows goes is, first thing is, are you using pots? Because people parsing over 75 percentile, they are definitely using Deadly Grace pots, or they're playing really well with at least prolonged power potions. So if you're not potting, you're going to have a hard time breaking 60 percentile. So that would be the first thing. The next thing is, how many times are you using Arcane Power and Evocation in a fight? A lot of times if you're taking too long on your burn, or you're cutting off Evocation, or you're moving around too much, so, oh, there's a mechanic, so then I run over here, because you're not utilizing Blink or Ice Flows, and so you run over here, we've just regenerated 10% mana while I was running for that mechanic, rather than going like this, and then, oh, line of sight it. And then sitting here when the mechanic goes off, just displacing back and using Ice Flows to cast on the run while you're running away from the mechanic. And then using it while you're running back. That'll keep draining your mana. So if you're moving too much, you'll notice that. And you're not going to get as many Arcane Powers or Evocations in because you're not burning your mana fast enough. So that's one thing to look at. Another thing is whether or not you're padding or not. And this is coming from a raid leader, so I understand that raid leaders may sometimes call for certain things. But an example is on Ellerith Renferal. On Heroic, for example, a lot of times the damage can be taken with the spiders on the boss. And so what people will do is they'll open on the boss but not use any of their cooldowns like this, and they'll keep the Quickening stacks up. And then she'll go up in the air, so they'll move out with the Ice Flows, cast Arcane Blast. And then when you find out where she's going, they'll run over to where she is, over here with all the little AoE things. And then they stack all the spiders up, and they'll drop Mark of Lunith, Rune of Power, Arcane Power. They're not Thumb Ring, and they'll just Arcane Blast. So they'll get easily 4 or 5 target Arcane Blast and an Explosion. And that'll be a significant amount of damage over what you might have been doing single targeting the boss. And so you have to be aware of stuff like that and where the damage is being output. And so there's ways to do that, as well as like on dragons, whether you got the side of Shade of Terrar or not, or you got the adds, the ghosts that spawn, arcane explosioning on that, or whether they're tanking all the adds together on Cenarius or what have it. You're going to have to pay attention to that as well. Because if you're not doing that and they're going to parse and you are not. Another thing that I previously mentioned was boss kill times. Having a perfect, 3 minute and 30 second parse on Ursoc or something may be the difference between getting to do that burn I talked about right at the end. Whereas if you have a 4 minute and 20 second parse, you have another 50 seconds or so without cooldowns before your cooldowns come back up. So that'll play a big role as well. And sometimes people pull boss trash with the boss just to pad more on the AoE and look for the top ranks. So those are a couple things. And then last I wanted to go over a couple tips on certain Emerald Nightmare encounters, and same with Trial of Valor. As far as Nethendra goes, you can basically stand against the wall while you're casting on Nethendra, and you depending on your strat, I guess, we spread all around the room, so you can stand on the wall, and then when you get rot, you can just blink out of it, and you shouldn't have to move. Then you can reposition close to another rot with an Icy Flows. And as far as the Mythic one goes, you can blink in, and you can drop a Rune of Power and then Arcane Explosion all the mind-controlled people, and that doesn't leave any dots, doesn't put any slows on them, so that's really what everybody wants. And then you just place back to your position and keep DPSing Nethendra. Who's next? I don't know. The order we do it in next is usually Ursoc, and as far as Ursoc goes, being able to Ice Flows and move on that fight is huge. Another thing on Mythic Ursoc is trying to save your Mark of Alunith for when the ad comes out. And a trick that you can do is you can rotate back and forth, and if you're doing the Quickening thing and you're trying to build Quickening stacks, you can tab target or make a macro that spams Nether Tempest on the last target, and that's a way that you can generate Arcane Missile procs, whereas if you do it on the same target, it doesn't happen as frequently. At least from testing, it doesn't. So you can use that to go back and forth on. And outside of that, another big tip you can do is you can take one charge, and then if your party's taking too much damage, you can ice block the next charge. And even if you run Cold Snap, which this isn't a really high movement fight, especially if you do the strat right, then you can soak the next one, and then you can soak again if you had Cold Snap. So you could soak 5 in a row. And if you have all your mages doing that, that's significantly less damage that you take from the charges. Makes it easier to heal. On Il'gynoth, you can keep your Quickening stacks up on the eye, so that when the Nightmare Corruptor, whatever that thing's called, comes out, you have higher Quickening stacks to burn that down if that's a problem. Also, standing in the middle of the 3 Corruptor tentacles, you can hit all 3 with your Arcane Missiles, or with your Arcane Explosion. And yeah, that's as far as that boss goes. Who else do we got? We got the Spider Queen. The tips I mentioned. One thing that's big on this boss is you can burn your entire mana pool, keep your evocate, keep your Quickening stacks up, burn all of it again, or you can keep all your stacks up and keep your Quickening stacks, like I mentioned, and you'll have about 40 stacks right as a little bit before she goes into the pushback phase, and at that point you can burn all of your mana all the way down and then barrage right at the end, and that'll give you some time to regen mana while you move to the second platform. That's not as amazing if you're going to hero on the second platform, but on lower difficulties when you might parse, that could be good. Next up is dragons. Dragons, as far as tips go, you're a very self-sustaining class, so you can stand in the flowers pretty well with Ice Barrier. You can also Greater Invis and walk into it. You have a health potion, and I have the chest and the gift to the Naru, so I'm even more sustainable as far as that goes. And outside of that, killing the Shades of Terrar using Arcane Explosion rather than just Arcane Blast will net more damage. And on top of that, the Ghost Ads, I can never remember what they're called, but those coming across the field, you can blink out to where they are and then AoE them down and then blink back. That's really all that fight is. It's really just better to be a fire mage on that fight. But I won't admit that I said that, or I'll just deny it. Next up is Cenarius. Cenarius is a pretty good fight. I would save your first Mark of Lunith in your burn phase from Cenarius and put it on the dragon and the ancient that come out, and you'll get more damage out of that, and you can Arcane Explosion them while you're stacking. There's not too many other great things on Cenarius that we can do other than kite the brambles really well. And then on Xavius, the biggest tip I can give you is make sure you burn all your mana and all your cooldowns before you come out of the dream. And if you're looking to parse on the tentacles, if this is the boss and this is where Xavius is stacked, and there's 2 tentacles here, you can be here in Arcane Explosion and get, see this damage is coming out? You can get 3 times as much by doing that, or just blinking to where there's a big clump of them if you're looking to parse. And I think that's about it for Emerald Nightmare. For Trial of Valor on Odin, your life just sucks as a mage, and that's about all there is to it. I've noticed that Frost does a little bit better because there's so much movement. And then on Gwarm, you can definitely, since you're so mobile, let's see, if he's coming charge, let's say he's this guy and he starts charging down the aisle right here, you can Ice Flows out of the way, charge, and then come this way to still keep in range, and then you can blink, oh, except for that stopped me, out of the way, and continue to Ice Flows and continue to cast on him while running down, and that way you don't drop Quickening stacks. That, and there's not too much else in terms of that fight, other than making sure you stay away, and keeping out of the Frost Lick, or if you get the Frost Lick, instantly Ice Block and then cancel macro, so you can keep Quickening stacks up. On Helya, the biggest thing would be saving a Rune of Power, hopefully a Mark of Lunith, and a lot of mana for when the ads come out, and you can burst those down insanely quickly and do a ton of damage there. And another thing, when you get an orb on you, you can turn around and blink, and then you can Ice Flows up the stairs, and then you can use Displacement to get back in position. As well, you can hit 3 of the slimes with your Arcane Explosion. If you get in between 3 of them, you can hit 3 of them. So that's a good way to DPS those down. And I don't think there's anything else in that fight particularly. But remember that you do good ad damage, so please do the ad damage. That's what Arcane Mages are great at, is bursting things down. You just Arcane Missile it and obliterate it. But that's where most of the tips go. If you guys liked the video or it helped you out in any way, please subscribe and like the video. It really helps me out. And you can check me out on my other channels and Twitch, and that'll all come up afterwards and be down in the description. But thanks for checking out the video. We'll see ya.